The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Judy Mikovits, the molecular biologist, medical researcher, and author. For over 3 decades, you conducted internationally respected research in top government labs, with your doctoral thesis revolutionizing the fight against HIV. Throughout your career, you've exposed fraud at the highest levels of healthcare, including that of Dr. Anthony Fauci, the current heads of both the National Institute of Health and the Center for Disease Control. Your new book, the New York Times bestseller, Plague of Corruption, explains your experience with Dr. Fauci and outlines his deceit of the American public and the impact on their health. You are featured in the new documentary Plandemic, which details the corruption that is rife in the healthcare system. And you are here today to respond to critics and refute the claims being made against you and the film. Dr. Mikovits, welcome back to London Real.
Thanks, Brian. Pleasure to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. First of all, I just want to announce that we are streaming now on our brand new Digital Freedom platform, which is a censorship-free, independent broadcasting system that is of the people, by the people, for the people, and available exclusively through our website at londonreal.tv. I want to ask everyone watching now to please share this link via the sidebar to any and all of your social media channels. Let me repeat that. Could everyone watching please share this link via the sidebar to all your social media channels? This is important. This is the way we can get the word out. Simply ask your friends and family to just give us 15 minutes today and they can decide. Dr. Mikovits, I pledge to you and everyone watching us that none of this conversation will be edited, censored, removed, or banned, and that anyone in the world can watch the full version of this episode free at londonreal.tv/Mikovits, thanks to the generous donations of over 30,000 people around the world, also known as the London Real Army. For anyone wanting to become a founding member of the Digital Freedom platform, they can go to londonreal.tv/freedom to donate and fight with us on the front lines to protect our human rights. Here at London Real, we've been a platform for free speech since 2011. And Judy, I'm excited to have you here today. You know, I want to get into the detailed feedback from Science Magazine and their criticism of Plandemic and your work. But before we do that, some people might not have watched our previous interview, which they can watch on the Freedom platform. But maybe you can tell us, who are you and why are you the most censored person in the world these days?
Well, I'm a PhD molecular biologist and biochemist and virologist of more than 40 years, been looking at how particularly retroviruses, but how viruses cause disease by dysregulating the immune system. We've done seminal work in 4 or 5 fields: epigenetics, gene expression, development of technologies to look at disease signatures, a lot of therapeutic development, and unfortunately, or fortunately, in 2009, we discovered a new family of mouse-related viruses, contagious mouse cancer-causing virus, and it was published to great fanfare in the journal Science on October 8th of 2009, first electronically. But then as our studies continued throughout 2010 and 11 with other investigators confirming more strains of mouse viruses, we did a lot of work showing a heavily contaminated blood supply. And then the realization in 2011, really, that there were many other disease associations other than chronic fatigue syndrome and autism. There were many cancers. There were blood disorders like ITP, which is a bleeding disorder that is a side effect of MMR vaccination. And the work basically started to show that the mixture of animal tissues and the injection of these mouse viruses, monkey viruses, cow viruses, they're called adventitious agents, that they most likely got into the human virome at the levels that affected 25 to 50 million Americans by way of not only a contaminated blood supply, but vaccines.
Okay. And why have you been censored so much lately? I mean, between Plandemic and your interviews, we joked last time, you're like whack-a-mole Judy, but you really seemed that all of your content's being taken down. Do you have thoughts why your stuff seems to trigger so many forces?
Well, yeah, I think the reason is that discovery and the fact that the blood supply had been contaminated for probably the entire 30 years with a new family of, AIDS really, and cancer causing AIDS like retroviruses, that they could recombine and be contagious. So you and I could share coffee and through water droplets, through what we're seeing now with COVID-19, that you can cough a cancer-causing virus that can go through the generation, that these things were transmissible through as a contagion, and they came through the vaccines. That was 25 times minimum HIV at the height of the HIV infection, which was 1991. So here it was 91. It was 25. It was 1 million Americans with HIV infection, and the cost to the economy, the cost to the world of that HIV being spread through a contaminated blood supply, as we recall when we were told only it was gay-related immune deficiency and it couldn't be transmitted that way, and they didn't. And then in fact we found with Ryan White, the hemophiliac small child, and Arthur Ashe, who got a blood transfusion during a heart surgery. So all of a sudden it was, oh my God. So when that this virus could have spread around the world by a contaminated blood supply. Now in 2011, our work was clearly showing at least 25 times that. The economy simply couldn't support that level because it was the fault of the government in doing things. It's called xenotransplantation. When you inject foreign tissue, foreign, the word xeno means foreign, and so when you inject animal tissue into humans, bypassing directly into their blood, the realization was you could pick up dormant viruses that don't hurt the animals or cause anything, and we don't even know they're there. So the realization was, oh my God, how many strains of monkey, mouse, cow, and other kinds of viruses and microbes were entering the human population because of these untested, they haven't been tested since 1986, was the realization that Del Bigtree and Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s Children's Health Defense Fund, with lawsuits and FOIA's Freedom of Information Act, proved this last year, that in fact they had done no safety studies and had no evidence at all that vaccines couldn't cause these diseases. Then we made the association of many strains, and the level of damage to our society, we simply couldn't afford it, based on that being 25 times the trillions of dollars that the HIV epidemic cost us. This was 25 times more than that.
Wow. So the ramifications on the human race they're massive. And it shows that this has been going on for 30 years. And that's why you think you're being silenced or trying to be silenced.
Correct. And that's what the books clearly say. Our first book, Plague, talks about these viruses, very detailed science with at least every single statement we make is referenced to a study, to an event, and that's our book, Plague. And in the foreword of our paperback, in the new material, of the paperback of our book, I talked all about what I didn't know at the time. The hardback came out in 2014, the paperback came out in 17, and I had no idea. And the new material discusses the depth of Tony Fauci's role and the corruption at the level of the scientific fake news. That the realization that our top scientific journals like Nature there in the UK and Science in the US, the editors, the opinion articles were taking science and covering up, the plague of disease with a plague of corruption. So that's why we wrote our second book, because in our first book we had no idea we were reporting the science. And our first book, nobody said one word about it, despite, from the government. So if we're wrong, and we're heavily referenced here with emails and the scientific papers, everything we said in here, every word is backed up by a supportive facts and was fact checked by the attorneys at Skyhorse Publishing. Every word was correct, and yet deafening silence. And all of a sudden in 2019, with our book publishing April 14th, Plague of Corruption. Plague of Corruption simply started when we, as we discussed before, when we realized it was the vaccines and the xenotransplantation and really corruption, as the government over decades, not just a few years, has covered up the infection, the contaminants and the adventitious agents, and how they're driving the chronic infectious disease, cancer, really this explosion of disease in the vaccinated that's not supported in the unvaccinated. They're not sick. So because of liabilities and the freedom from liabilities from the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, our experiences in Plague of Corruption as we served with expert witnesses in the vaccine court associated with that act, where the victims are compensated for the injury. That court's paid out $4 billion or more, as you know, and that's only representing, from the best estimates, 1%. So that the details, the data and everything supports that the why now is because COVID-19 is in fact a plague of corruption to cover up these infectious adventitious agents, and the clinical data that we talked about at depth last time supporting that, the ventilators, the masks, why these are actually driving the disease. People are being buried and called coronavirus COVID-19 as a single agent cause of this plandemic, if you will, and it's not at all, because we talked about it great detail last time. Koch's postulates or Hill's criteria for a microbial agent to cause a disease. Everyone that's infected has to get the disease, and of course we know that's not true. So throughout my studies, you see with SARS-CoV-2, because most people that get exposed are healthy. Only the sick with comorbidities are at risk of dying from the infection. So you don't die, and the example I use is, if you can have AIDS, HIV, and never get AIDS. And that's what my PhD thesis changed, when we recognized the immune system and how that causes disease. We know the same things being said in the case of COVID-19, but it's all turned backwards to now this coronavirus alone is the causative agent of COVID-19. And all of the data say otherwise. And in fact, a lot of the clinical data say the XMRVs are involved, other adventitious agents from vaccines. The people who are susceptible are the vaccine injuries, because now, and those will be, those 25 to 50 million Americans will be the ones who die if they're inoculated with anything, really, with the flu vaccines, which are driving this COVID-19. That's published data. That's nothing I say is my opinion. What I say is clinical data, biological data, molecular data, and I really can and have supported every word of it in 2 books and 4 decades of work with other viruses and how they cause disease.
Yeah, and you shocked me last time when you said 50 million Americans would die if we went ahead with some of these vaccines. And I thought 15, and then it was 50. And I spoke to Dr. Sherry Tenpenny last Friday, and she said, yeah, Brian, that's what Judy is saying. And that's in America. And she continued to reiterate that was only in America, not to mention worldwide. So there are quite a few high-level doctors that agree with your assessment. I just had a thought. I mean, if it wasn't for this COVID-19 crisis and lockdown, would we have heard your name, or would have this just been never commented on and it would have been very quiet still? I mean, did this crisis and the rise of Fauci allow people to recognize who you are and then quiet you? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I thought about it a lot because, of course, a plague of corruption was going to come out anyway, first slated for November 5th of last year, but then we learned a little bit more about it and delayed in order for Bobby Kennedy, who understood at the environmental toxin level so much more about other top level scientists who were silenced by our government over the last 50 years when they discovered inconvenient truths about vaccines. So yeah, the publication of Plague of Corruption, certainly I expected, because it's so clear and so easy to read. People might have heard my name, but certainly not the level of the scientific attacks. The Washington Post back again with the fake news, the Wall Street Journal, people that participated in the fake science news. Defamation and spinning the story that XMRVs do nothing, they're not there, they're all gone. We took care of that, so you could see the media, both the science media and the mainstream media, saying exactly opposite things. So XMRV is all a hoax, goes across Good Morning America at the end of 2011, 2012. We took care of that bad Judy Mikovits. Yeah, we took all of that then. So the disease, the sick communities, of course, knew my name, and of course they were targeted as they are now. But yeah, no, I really do think that the explosion, what the book shows, what the data reveal, and then COVID-19 was really a desperate act to cover up those 40 years. Because again, if we bury everybody with and call it COVID-19, and it has nothing or little, if anything, to do with a coronavirus, the testing's fraud, then you'll never know the XMRVs. You'll never know the adventitious agents. The country will never know. They'll say, oh, it was like the Spanish flu in 1918. So I firmly believe this is a carefully orchestrated plandemic, and that's what I said in the movie. And everything over the last decade, as we've discovered more and more corruption, it didn't start yesterday, and I really think they hit the detonate switch, and that's why these measures are being taken, because everything will kill the susceptible, and they will bury them and never know. Nobody will ever know that it was in fact the XMRV. So where is the real hoax? And really the data support that COVID-19 is the hoax perpetrated to cover up the truth of the XMRVs.
And for people that are not as familiar, what does that term mean, XMRV?
Well, it means xenotropic, the X. Murine, the M stands for murine leukemia virus. So there are mouse cancer-causing, mouse leukemias, mouse cancer-causing retroviruses. And so the RV means retrovirus or associated with. So XMRV is a xenotropic because it's not in a mouse, it's in a human. and it's related at the strain level to mouse cancer and neuroimmune disease like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, containing family of viruses, which are called gamma retroviruses from mice. And so to make it, to correlate that with SARS-CoV-2, so that means severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus number 2, because it's most closely related to SARS, not as closely related in a strain sense to MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus. So the XMRVs are a family of viruses, gamma retroviruses, the class, that are endogenous to mice, monkeys, birds. They're gamma retroviruses, but the murine, the mouse type, was what was first found and identified as sequences that were sequences in 2000, and I believe it was published in 2005 by Joe DeRisi and Bob Silverman, and those are key parts to the story because they had in fact never isolated the virus, and we did in 2009 and showed it wasn't just a single strain of virus, which they never are, and that's how the words and the science gets twisted, and how the journal again last week attacks me by twisting words. So it's propaganda masquerading as science when we use terms like it and they and the don't exist. And so what does it mean when you can't replicate studies? So they're families of viruses, they're strains of viruses. They come from, many animals are infected with the families of viruses, just as many animals have different kinds of coronaviruses.
Okay, good. And we're going to actually go in and go head to head with some of this criticism from Science Magazine. And you've got a presentation that I think you've given before that we're going to screen share and actually just show the proof, because this is an information war. I mean, I'm starting to see that. And look, just, Judy, I'm new to this, I mean, I was blown away a couple weeks ago when Bobby Kennedy was on, and I started learning about vaccines and started learning about the protocols and the liability laws. And I've further been brought up the curve with Dr. Buttar, speaking with you, speaking with Sherry Tenpenny, speaking with you again. Dr. Buttar's on again tomorrow. And I've been flabbergasted by what's going on. And I come from a science background, so I can kind of understand how normal science is done, and it doesn't seem to exist here. And I'm starting to see this kind of what you're talking about, this plague of corruption, this kind of this it's almost like, it's been co-opted by a group of people that it's in their interest for it to remain the same or to not be made public. And that's what you're saying. And I think people need to kind of understand that scope. And look, I can't wait to get into some of these pieces and also share the presentation. You've also had a lot of problems these days with, you're getting hacked left and right? Even your websites and your emails. Just talk about that right now. And where do you think that's coming from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's planned to silence us, as you just mentioned. A group like Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, like Dr. Buttar, like Bobby Kennedy Jr., Del Bigtree, people that have been working in this area, in this group for 20 years. We're all working together, and when another scientist from another visionary viewpoint comes out and starts revealing more, then everybody is interwoven. And because you're showing these things on YouTube, and because people see the science, and when it's explained to them like we do in our books as sixth grade science, and you can show how the media is used, it's not the work, it's not the investigations, it's what the editors and the journals are saying about the science. So I think people are starting to realize what we're being told as a community is based on, and that's the hardest thing to realize, fake science news, this cartel of the granting agencies and your publications determining your career, and we're censored, we're only allowed to look at a little bit. So I gave this presentation in its entirety at the Truth About Cancer live symposium last October in Anaheim, California. So I've been showing it since that time in various formats, and it's detailed. It kind of follows the book Plague of Corruption in what we learned and why it's there. It's almost an expose. But now all of a sudden, last week when I sent this slideshow and our book electronic version to Martin Ensering by email, he wrote me, "Oh, dear Judy, hope you're doing well. Really, you had me jailed. You ruined my career. You want to know if I'm doing well. And you haven't talked to me in 8 years. And all of a sudden, here we are. You're asking me for comments in Science Journal." So I didn't write "lovely to hear for you" or anything like that. I simply emailed this slideshow and the electronic version of the book. And so I believe it was commented on in the Science magazine. So since he didn't recognize that I was taking verbatim what they said, and all of a sudden, as soon as I presented the data, and Charlene Bollinger did a longer expose a few weeks ago at The Truth About Vaccines, supporting me right after these Washington Post and Science articles defaming me and libeling whatever they were doing to me once again. And then everything started getting censored. Charlene, Truth About Vaccines, Truth About Cancer. This slideshow just 2 days ago was taken off our own website, and we were told we couldn't use this slideshow anyway. So what don't they want you to know?
How can they take a slideshow off your own website?
Yeah.
All right. So that slideshow is going to be put on our website right below this video. We're getting it up right now so people can look at it, and we're going to share some pieces of that today. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to share some pieces as they answer the question.
Yeah, well, we'll get to the questions first. And I'll start to go through some of the things that they brought up. Is it worth talking about, Fauci right now? And,
So essentially no, because, and we'll talk about it only for the second of, and that's where we could actually start sharing this screen.
Okay.
And that could be the last thing we say about Fauci right now.
Okay.
So this slide was probably the third slide in this slideshow, and what you see here is what you see here on the left-hand side is an invitation-only meeting. And this was chapter 8 of our first book. It was a workshop, Public Health Implications of XMRV Infection. And so it basically says, hey, there's so much data coming out that look like there may be a real problem with this new mouse-related family of retroviruses. And they invited from every level of the government and academia, you see on the left-hand side, experts from the divisions, from the CDC, the FDA, as you would when you suspect an agent is going through a contaminated blood supply, as HIV did. And so here and this was July 22nd, 2009. So 4 months before our paper, which we submitted on May 6, 2009. So that long a time while everybody vetted our data and everybody confirmed our data and nothing was shown wrong in the study. And then it came out with extreme fanfare. Well, Tony Fauci's NIAID, he's shown here at the NIH Clinical Center right there at NIH. Next to him on the right-hand side, I'm pointing to Francis Collins, the head of the NIH. Tony Fauci is the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease. And here is Harold Varmus, who in 2011 was brought back to head the National Cancer Institute. And that's significant because these studies were done in collaboration with my lifelong mentor at the National Cancer Institute. And what they're doing here with Hillary Clinton in 2011, and this, by the way, is after they shut down XMRV politically and as a hoax. So the who and the why you can only come up with that what I told you before, and that is because these are the diseases. So everything with an asterisk has been in multiple publications associated with retroviruses, including this family or closely related family strains of these retroviruses. So I said 21st century acquired endocannabinoid because they hurt our endogenous cannabinoid system and immune dysfunctions, a different kind of AIDS than HIV. And I said unintended consequences of unsafe vaccinations and schedule. So what's important about these diseases is they are, here's a 2010 comment, quote from a meeting with a lifelong or a 20-year veteran, Suzanne Vernon of the CDC. And so after that September meeting where I showed not only more disease associations and more chronic fatigue syndrome, I also showed that there were other disease associations, including autism, including ITP. And so what she said was, after that conference, when the blood supply of London was contaminated, and Francis Collins there ordered Tony Fauci to fund a large multi-center validation study, and that's what we're talking about now. That was September 11th of 2010. And I said, well, she said, agency heads are scared to death if XMRV works out. And the question why is because in 1991, it was 1 million Americans infected with HIV. And in 2010, between 10 and 25 million Americans were infected with the XMRVs, which likely got into humans from contaminated blood and vaccines. So that's the big why. And so what are these people doing here? Well, they're giving an award to these investigators for cannabis drug development and research. I believe it's in Israel. It's certainly not in the U.S. I believe this is an Israeli researcher. I mean, they do fabulous work, but our government holds the patent since 2004 on cannabis natural plant therapies. American investigators can't do this research, and we're sending tax millions, if not tens of millions, of tax American dollars to, and these would be curative therapies for the XMRVs. So that's the who and the why.
Okay, and what does that prove that they refuted? That this isn't the cover-up. This isn't that he masterminded the entire cover-up. We didn't address that there.
No, and in fact, this was the group that in 2009, again, 4 months before the paper was published, heavily vetted, said, yes, this is a huge public health issue. So this is a huge public health issue. These people came in because of the cancer. Harold Varmus came back from where and took a $2 million pay cut, annual salary pay cut, to come back and run the National Cancer Institute because of the cancer implications of these studies. Because in these other presenters at the invitation-only meeting, at the July 22nd workshop, were other investigators who found similar viruses in other diseases, like cardiac disease, like prostate cancer and other cancers. So they're calling together experts saying, we have a huge public health problem. And then 4 months later, after they completely checked our work, our paper was published, and the work of some of the others on this list. These simultaneous papers came out in September and October showing, yes, XMRV, we isolated the virus. All our papers said for the first time, so all we knew since 2005 there were sequences of the virus in men with aggressive forms of prostate cancer, and we appreciated the biology, the immunology, the susceptibility factors were an enzyme that degrades RNA.
So I'm just trying to understand what you just showed me on the screen. What does that prove? And do they just disagree that meeting existed, or disagree that conclusion was made?
Yeah, so they never mentioned this meeting and the fact that our paper was so heavily vetted. So then Science goes on to say, so it was vetted before it was published, heavily vetted, more than any single paper, I think, because of the implications, and then came out to great fanfare. And then the problems didn't come where they started taking, attacking me and the messengers until the implications became so much bigger with the contaminated blood supplies and the vaccines.
Okay, understood. Can I get into a few of the things that the Science magazine talked about? Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
I think one of the big things they said is that you would claim that Fauci masterminded the entire cover-up, and Science magazine said, and I'm probably paraphrasing, but I think we've got it right, it's not clear which fraud and what cover-up Mikovits is talking about exactly. There's no evidence that Fauci was involved in a cover-up or that anyone was paid off with funding from him or his institute. No one has ever been charged with fraud in relation to Mikovits' allegations. How do you respond to that?
So Tony Fauci funded. So Francis Collins said, we need to do a large multi-center study to confirm what we were saying. And as soon as our paper was published, because of the implications of a contaminated blood supply, just as in HIV/AIDS, as soon as our paper was published, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which is not under the direction of Tony Fauci, started doing studies to develop tests to identify the virus in the blood supply. So the cover-up was the way the studies were done in Science, the journal, and by the other investigators, not only by the NIAID of XMRV contaminating the blood supply and the vaccines, but because that study was what the multi-center study that was we started the study design on November 4th of 2010. It was that study that Francis Collins ordered to be done when the London blood supply, where I got control samples, had 4% of the controls positive, as opposed to, and here in our original paper, we said 3.75. In Harvey Alter's confirmatory paper that was published in mid-2010, they showed 7%. So the big issue here and why Fauci spearheaded the cover-up is because Francis Collins, his boss, the head of the NIH, all of the institutes said, we must fund a multi-center study to look at the disease associations. And this was the study that was corrupted by the study director of the study, Ian Lipkin, and I do have a slide I can show how that works as far as excluding the appropriate patients and then limiting the findings that we were able to do based on wording really that had nothing to do with the study. So you can see how the study was corrupted. So and this was, I was held as a fugitive, a felony fugitive from justice, arrested in November 18th, 2011. And I do have the quote from Science, the journal, that in fact says federal agents were the only ones who could have. There was no warrant, there was no arrest, there was nothing. But that was when I was supposed to be participating in the validation study, doing the isolation, doing the things I did as the principal investigator on the original study. But Tony Fauci said, put that felony from fugitive from justice at the NIH, at the NCI, in the laboratory. So I couldn't do the study because I was called a fugitive from justice. So I did virology by telephone and tried the best I could because I knew we would get positives in the study, because even though 3 of the centers or 4 of the centers were not valid patients according to the disease signature, that's the publication I also sent that you could post. There's a disease signature, just as we see in COVID-19, of these viruses. So
okay, you're being, is this when you're being held without charges and what they dispute, or is this a different piece? Because
no, that's when I was being held in 2011.
Okay.
I was held in jail for 5 days, as we discussed before. All the while, our paper is being force retracted from the journal because they've lost confidence in me. Oh, now I'm supposedly stealing things. Now I'm supposedly but what Tony Fauci did, he stopped the validation study. One, he kept me out of the labs. And two, and I show Harold Varmus there because the study design, Harold corrupted the study design by ordering that the infectious clone, which was not what we isolated, that infectious synthetic clone, which way overgrew the samples, he insisted some samples be spiked with that. And so then it would have said contamination. So at every level of the people in that picture, there's a corruption and a cover-up. So when against all odds, we would have validated our original paper, Tony Fauci stopped the study, said we're wasting too much money. He applied he directed Ian Lipkin, the senior investigator on the paper, to apply a statistical program to say anything we were finding in that last cohort was in fact contamination, which it absolutely was not.
Okay, so this is how they are covering it up. They obviously said there's no evidence and there's no funding and no one's been charged in fraud. And you're saying, yeah, this is how they did it. So basically, you're explaining how they did it in a way that wouldn't show evidence that Fauci did this, and so I see what you're saying. All right, so you're showing how they did it with this explanation, and that's obviously something that Science Magazine is saying, oh, there's none of this and this and that, because they're actually not addressing your specific arguments.
Yeah, they're not, and in fact, I can, in that paper, so then they link in that article the press conference. So here's how they corrupted the study. We were only allowed, and this I'll go back to the slide for just a minute for this. We were only allowed to say, because of the title of our paper, and this makes it a lot easier, and this is how manipulation of data happens, because we were only allowed to say that, and it matters for the title of this paper so you can understand. So our paper originally said detection of see the word an infectious retrovirus called XMRV. Again, DeRisi and Silverman had identified sequences in prostate cancer patients, but they never isolated it. And so that's what's critically important. So an infectious retrovirus is that they had called, they said they discovered it, they held a patent on it, they made a synthetic infectious molecular clone, which is standard procedure, but the virus hadn't been isolated. So it says of an infectious retroviruses. And our paper, I highlighted there, taken together, these demonstrate for the first direct isolation of infectious XMRV, it's not plural at the time, from humans, and implicate a role for XMRV in infection in the pathogenesis of CFS. So we didn't say it caused it. We said it implicates a role for it, and that's the original abstract of this paper. Well, 6 months later, and it should have been shorter, Harvey Alter confirmed our studies.
Okay. This is good. This is going very into the detail, and I still have about 6 or 7 of the things I just want to get your counters with Science Magazine. Can you?
Okay, so let's do that. But that tells you, because that's a real key. The title of that paper is how they twisted the study. We were only allowed to find VP62 because Bob Silverman said it was VP62. It was that sequence that we isolated. And in fact, they made the mistake. They forced in sequencing our strains, it wasn't VP62. It never was. They held the patent. So we, in fact, had discovered and done the real isolation of a new family of viruses. And this is how it got all confused, because we were only allowed in the confirmation study to say XMRV VP62, and that virus was a cloning mistake. It was synthetic. It never was in vivo.
So this allowed that further cover up to happen because of this specific point that was made here. Okay, that makes sense. And now I also see
cover up.
Okay, and now I also see, without you being specific, it's very easy for not only mainstream media, but even a magazine like Nature to kind of gloss over this.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.